Hello, everyone. This is your time to disconnect from the outside world and join me on a journey through this emotional story. So, relax, focus on the sound of my voice, and let the story envelop you, taking you away from all the stresses of the day. Angela's heart sank as the red and blue lights flickered in her rearview mirror, casting an ominous glow on the familiar dashboard of her car. Her daughter Zoe, who had been chattering excitedly about her science project, fell silent, her small hands clutching the strap of her backpack tightly. "Mom, what's happening?" Zoe's voice was tinged with worry, her eyes wide with the kind of fear only a child can feel in uncertain times. Angela took a deep breath, forcing a smile to reassure her daughter. "It's okay, sweetie. It's just a routine stop. Maybe I forgot to signal or something minor. Don't worry." She reached over, squeezing Zoe's knee gently, but her own stomach knotted as she watched the officer step out of his patrol car in her side mirror. The officer's brisk approach seemed more charged than the situation called for, and Angela's attempt at normalcy quickly faded. She remembered the advice her father had given her years ago, the same words she repeated in her head every time she saw a uniform: stay calm, be polite, keep your hands where they can see them. "License and registration, please." The officer's voice was devoid of warmth, his face hidden behind mirrored sunglasses that reflected her anxious expression back at her. As she handed over her documents, Angela's mind raced. She had always taught Zoe to respect the police, to see them as helpers and protectors. But now, she felt the heavy weight of the responsibility to protect her daughter from what might not be just a simple traffic stop. "Why did you stop us, officer?" Angela asked again, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a hint of steel in her tone, born of a mother's instinct to shield her child from harm. The officer glanced back at Zoe, then at Angela, his expression unreadable. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "For what reason?" Angela's compliance was automatic, but her mind screamed for a rationale she could explain to her daughter, who looked on with growing alarm. "I said, step out." His command sliced through the crisp morning air, more a bark than a spoken request. Angela's door clicked open, and she stepped onto the pavement, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. Zoe's voice, small but fierce, broke through her rising fear. "Mom, are you going to be okay?" Angela turned to her daughter, her own fear masked by the facade of calm she wore. "Yes, honey. Just stay in the car. Everything's going to be okay." But as she turned back to face Officer Briggs, the sharp sting of his hand against her cheek shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy. It was a moment suspended in time, the sound of the slap echoing down the quiet street, a stark and dissonant chord that resonated with the sudden silence that followed. Zoe's scream, "Don't touch my mom," was a clarion call that pierced the morning, a fearless declaration that drew Angela back from the brink of despair. Her legs, which had almost buckled under the shock, now rooted firmly to the ground. She stood, not just for herself but for her daughter, her presence a testament to the unyielding spirit that adversity could not break. This moment, raw and real, marked not just a confrontation on a quiet street, but a pivotal turn in their lives, where fear met courage and silence found its voice in the words of a child. As Angela felt the sharp sting of the slap, a deafening silence seemed to swallow the morning bustle around them. The world narrowed to the two of them standing by the side of the road, under the watchful eyes of her daughter. "Why did you hit me?" she whispered, her voice choked with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Officer Briggs, his face a mask of stern authority mixed with confusion, didn't answer. Instead, he glanced nervously around, perhaps realizing the gravity of his action, the momentary lapse that had escalated an ordinary traffic stop into something much darker. "Mommy, are you okay?" Zoe's voice cracked through the tension, her small face crumpled with worry as she watched from the car. The sight of her daughter's distress fueled a surge of strength within Angela. She straightened up, her cheek burning, her resolve hardening. "I'm okay, baby," Angela called back, forcing a calm she did not feel. She turned back to face Officer Briggs, her eyes clear and direct. "I am asking you again, officer. Why did you stop us? Why did you hit me?" Officer Briggs shuffled, his hand resting uneasily on his belt. You were speeding," he muttered, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "I was not speeding," Angela countered quietly, her tone firm. The accusation felt flimsy in the air between them, and both knew it. Angela could feel the eyes of other drivers who had slowed down to witness the exchange, could sense their silent questions and the weight of their attention. "This isn't right," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "You cannot just hit someone." Before she could finish, Officer Briggs cut her off. "You need to calm down, or I will arrest you for resisting." "Resisting? Resisting what?" Angela's voice rose, laced with incredulity. Her heart hammered in her chest, a rapid beat that echoed her rising panic and anger. "I have not resisted. I am trying to protect my daughter and understand why I am being treated this way." From the car, Zoe's voice rose again, higher and more desperate. "Leave my mom alone," she screamed, her small hands balled into fists. The growing crowd of onlookers murmured their disapproval. Phones were raised higher, videos capturing every word, every expression. The recording lights seemed to multiply, tiny red eyes that bore into Officer Briggs, silent witnesses to his conduct. Angela knew these videos could protect her or expose her to greater harm, but she also recognized their power. "This is not just about me," she spoke loudly, aware of the cameras, her voice steady despite the quiver of emotion. "This is about every person who has been unjustly treated. We deserve respect. We deserve justice." Her words hung in the air, a plea for fairness that resonated with the silent watchers. Officer Briggs looked around, the first signs of doubt creeping into his posture as he took in the sea of phones, the collective gaze of the public eye. Angela reached out, her hand trembling but her touch gentle, as if to remind him of her humanity. "You can make this right," she said softly. "Start by treating me with the dignity I deserve." In that moment, Angela wasn't just a woman pulled over on a morning drive, she was every mother, every daughter, every person who had ever stood in the face of injustice. And as the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows on the road, it also illuminated the hope that even in moments of deep division, understanding and respect could prevail. The chill of the morning air was suddenly thick with tension, the quiet disrupted by the slap that resonated like a gunshot. Angela's cheek burned, a stark red mark blossoming across her skin. As she reeled from the shock, her daughter's cry pierced the air, slicing through the haze of disbelief. "Mom!" Zoe's voice, normally so cheerful on their morning drives, was now a battle cry. She leaped from the car, her small frame trembling with both fear and fury. Her school bag slipped from her shoulder and thudded to the ground, unnoticed. "Don't touch my mom." Zoe stood defiantly, her body instinctively positioning itself between her mother and the officer. Her chest heaved with heavy breaths, her eyes glaring up at the man who towered over them. Officer Briggs, taken aback by the young girl's courage, momentarily hesitated. His face, previously masked in authority, now flickered with confusion. Angela, despite the sting of pain, wrapped her arm protectively around Zoe, drawing her close. The street was silent, the usual morning bustle halted as pedestrians stopped in their tracks, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. A young woman at a nearby cafe raised her phone, capturing the scene, her hands shaking slightly as she recorded. "Why did you hit her?" Zoe's voice cracked as she addressed the officer, her innocence grappling with the harsh reality before her. "She didn't do anything wrong." Angela's heart ached for her daughter, witnessing such raw injustice at such a young age. She kissed the top of Zoe's head, her own voice firm as she spoke again to the officer. "We deserve an explanation. This is not how you treat people. This is not how we teach our children respect for the law." Officer Briggs, now clearly uncertain, glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers. Phones in hand, they were documenting every moment, every word. The officer's hand, which had delivered the strike, now hung limply by his side, as if it belonged to someone else. I thought you were reaching for something," he stammered, his justification falling flat in the heavy air. "We were reaching for our registration," Angela replied sharply, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "You asked for it. We complied. There was no threat." Zoe, still clinging to her mother, looked up at her with wide, tearful eyes. Angela squeezed her daughter reassuringly, her gaze never leaving the officer's face. A siren in the distance heralded the approach of another police car. The onlookers shifted, their murmurs growing louder, a communal ripple of disapproval spreading through them. As the second police unit pulled up, a senior officer stepped out, his expression grave as he took in the scene. He approached slowly, his eyes shifting from Briggs to Angela and Zoe, and then to the crowd with their cameras. "Officer Briggs," he addressed him formally, his voice authoritative yet calm. "Step aside. We need to sort this out properly." Angela watched as Briggs was led away, his head bowed. She turned to Zoe, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. "You were brave," she whispered to her daughter. "But I wish you didn't have to be." Zoe nodded, her eyes still fixed on the retreating figure of the officer. "I just wanted him to stop. I want it to be okay." Angela hugged her tightly, her eyes moist. "We'll make it okay," she promised, a fierce determination settling in her heart. They would seek justice, not just for themselves but for every silent voice stifled by fear and authority gone awry. Today, Zoe had shown her what it meant to stand unbroken, and together, they would carry that strength forward. The sunlight seemed to pause as Angela stood there, her cheek tingling with the pain of the slap but her spirit unyielding. Zoe clung to her side, small fingers gripping her mother's hand like a lifeline. As the crowd of onlookers grew, their murmurs wove through the tense air, stitching a tapestry of shock and support that blanketed mother and daughter. A woman stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice a soothing balm to Angela's frayed nerves. Angela managed a nod, her focus split between the woman's kind eyes and the approaching sirens of the backup officer Briggs had called. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with emotions. Zoe, braver than any child her age should ever need to be, wiped away a tear and looked up at the woman, a silent plea for reassurance reflected in her young eyes. The new officers arrived, their expressions a mix of professionalism and unease as they assessed the scene. One, a seasoned female officer, approached Angela directly. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds. I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" Her tone was gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness they had just endured. Angela recounted the ordeal, her voice steady but her hands trembling. Officer Reynolds listened intently, her brow furrowing with each word. She occasionally glanced at Zoe, who was now surrounded by a few teenage girls from the neighborhood, their presence a protective circle. As Angela spoke, more people from the community gathered. Some offered words of comfort, others indignation, but all shared a sense of solidarity. Among them was Mr. Jacobs, the owner of the local bookstore, who had always known Angela and Zoe as regulars. His presence was a reminder of the ordinary days that should have been, days filled with school runs and evening walks, not roadside confrontations. "I've seen this kind of thing on the news," Mr. Jacobs said, his voice heavy with dismay. "Never thought I'd see it happen here, to one of our own." The officers took notes and spoke quietly among themselves. Officer Reynolds assured Angela that the incident would be fully investigated. "We don't stand for this," she said firmly, a promise that this breach of trust would be addressed. As the formality subsided, Angela felt a profound weariness wash over her. But there was also a burgeoning strength, fueled not just by her own resolve but by the community's rallying support. She looked around at the faces, some familiar, some strangers, all united in their concern for her and Zoe. It was this tapestry of community that began to mend the puncture wound to her dignity. Zoe, watching her mother, saw the quiet strength that pulsed like a beacon. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small. Angela pulled her daughter close, her hug a fortress against the uncertainty. "Yes, baby, we will be," she assured her, her gaze lifting to meet the eyes of those gathered. "Thanks to all these kind people, we're not alone. And that gives us more strength than that officer could ever take away." The day ended not with the echo of a slap, but with the community's embrace. Angela and Zoe walked home, their shadows long in the setting sun, but their spirits buoyed by the unexpected allies who had turned a moment of vulnerability into a platform for unity and change. The rain that evening seemed to wash the streets of Mayfield clean, mirroring the cleansing that was slowly, painfully happening within its community. As Angela stood behind the podium in the packed town hall, she felt the weight of every eye upon her, the weight of expectation, of shared sorrow, and of shared hope. The microphone hummed softly before her, a beacon in the dimly lit room, as she gathered her thoughts and courage. "Tonight," Angela began, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside, "we stand together not just in the shadow of a grievous wrong but on the precipice of making it right." She paused, looking out over the crowd, her gaze lingering on faces young and old, all united by a single cause. "What happened to us, what happened to my daughter and me, was not just our pain to bear. It is a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue that plagues not only our town but our country." The room was silent, the attendees hanging on her every word. Angela felt the raw emotion rise in her throat as she continued. "In the face of injustice, silence is the loudest scream. It tells the oppressor that their actions are acceptable, that their behavior can go unchecked. But we are here to change the narrative. We are here to say that we will not be silent, and we will not be intimidated." Angela's eyes flickered to Zoe, who sat in the front row, her young face a mask of fierce determination. The memory of that dreadful morning when the slap echoed through their lives resurfaced, and for a moment, Angela's voice cracked. "When my daughter stood up for me, she stood up for every mother, every daughter, and every son whose rights have been trampled under the guise of authority." Murmurs of agreement swept through the crowd, a wave of solidarity that felt palpable in the charged atmosphere. "Our fight is not against all police. Our fight is against injustice," Angela clarified, her tone firm. "It's about ensuring that those who are meant to protect us do not turn into the ones we need protection from." As she spoke, Angela proposed actionable steps for community police engagement, including body cameras, independent oversight, and more thorough training on racial sensitivity. "These are not just suggestions," she emphasized. "They are necessities for trust, for safety, and for the respect that every citizen deserves." The meeting concluded with a standing ovation, the applause ringing in Angela's ears like a promise. As people came up to her, shaking her hand, sharing their stories, and expressing their gratitude, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that her and Zoe's pain had ignited a spark that could potentially transform their community and beyond. As they drove home, the streets still wet from the rain and reflecting the street lights in a speckled dance of yellow and orange, Zoe leaned over and whispered, "Mom, do you think things will really change?" Angela squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart heavy yet hopeful. "They have to," she said quietly, her voice imbued with a mixture of resolve and hope. "Because every time we speak up, every time we stand up, we move one step closer to the world you deserve to live in." That night, as Angela tucked Zoe into bed and kissed her forehead, she whispered a silent prayer for strength and guidance. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but as she looked into her daughter's sleeping face, she knew it was a road they must travel, a road they would travel together, unbroken and unwavering. In the glow of the early evening sun, the community center buzzed with anticipation. Angela, taking a deep breath, stepped up to the podium, the murmur of the crowd fading as all eyes turned to her. "Every day," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "we face a choice. To speak up for what is right or to stay silent. To stand tall or to step back. I stand here before you because my daughter, Zoe, and I chose to speak, to stand, and not to be broken by fear." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, connecting with faces young and old, each reflecting their own stories of struggle and resilience. "A year ago, a moment defined us in ways I could never have anticipated," she continued. "A moment that could have broken us, but instead, it ignited a fire that burns brightly within this very community." As Angela spoke, Zoe sat in the front row, her eyes never leaving her mother. She remembered the fear on that day, the sting of injustice so palpable it was almost a physical weight upon her chest. But looking at her mother now, a pillar of strength and a beacon of hope, Zoe felt that weight lifting. They had turned a moment of profound ugliness into something profoundly beautiful: advocacy, dialogue, change. "The journey hasn't been easy," Angela admitted, her voice catching slightly. "There were days when the weight of what happened felt too heavy, when the eyes of the world seemed too critical, too skeptical. But every time I felt like giving up, I looked at Zoe, and I remembered the look in her eyes that day, the fear, yes, but also the resolve. My daughter taught me that we are stronger than we realize." The audience listened, rapt, as Angela shared the changes that had begun to take shape, the police training reforms now under discussion, the community outreach programs that were being developed, a new dialogue about race and responsibility that was emerging. "Change comes slowly," she acknowledged. "It's often painful and it's always challenging. But it is possible." As the speech drew to a close, Angela invited Zoe to join her at the podium. Hand in hand, they stood, an unspoken symbol of their journey from victims to victors. "This isn't just our story," Angela said, squeezing Zoe's hand. "It's everyone's story who has ever faced injustice and decided to push back, to fight for a better tomorrow." The applause that followed was not just in recognition of their courage, but also an acknowledgement of their contribution to a larger movement, a collective step forward. After the event, as the crowd began to disperse, an elderly woman approached Angela and Zoe. With tears in her eyes, she embraced them both. "You spoke for so many of us," she whispered. "For my sons, for my grandchildren. You've shown us that it's not the power of the strike that counts, but the strength of the comeback. Thank you for not staying silent." As the woman walked away, Zoe looked up at her mother. "Do you think things will really change, Mom?" Angela wrapped her arm around Zoe, their shadows merging in the dimming light. "Yes," she said firmly. "Because every time someone stands up, speaks up, refuses to be broken, the world shifts. And it's shifting, Zoe, one brave voice at a time. That night, as they walked back to their car under a sky streaked with pink and orange, Angela felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead was long, certainly, but they were ready to face it, together, unbroken and unwavering.